your Annexure A and highlight from that document such aspects that you think are particularly relevant to bring to the attention of the commissioners. That, if I may, that would be at your page 1 of the big file.
That's correct. Commissioners, I can just say briefly that if you have a look at page 2 thereof, you will see that my crime-fighting efforts go back some 40 or 50 years, in fact. So 1978, I received an award from Scotland Yard for preventing a crime in place and arresting a suspect. And then there's a whole lot of other annexes, we don't need to go through them, which will demonstrate that for the last 36 years in South Africa, I have been involved as a good citizen, attempting to play my part. My late father used to say, if a country is good enough to live in, it's good enough to fight for. And I took that quite literally when I joined the police back in 1990, which is now 36 years ago. And I gave of my time freely on a regular basis. Most reservist police officials would put in between 8 and 15 or 8 and 20 hours a month. You were required to do 8. I regularly did 60 to 80 hours a month. Not because I was bored, but because I had business activities which compensated me very well, and I just wanted to give something back to the community. And during that first, shall we say, 10 or 12 or 14 years, I made a number of arrests as a police official, and in fact I was shot on duty 3 times. So I went through the rigmarole of doing what I did, and then I started focusing on drug cartels, and I also started focusing on organized crime insofar as corruption is concerned. And my career in the police came to a rapid end when I was dismissed by then Commissioner of Police Jackie Celebi, and the rest of it after that is history. I decided to open an investigation into Commissioner Celebi, and as is known, he was found guilty of corruption and sent to jail for 15 years. And on after that, commissioners, I got involved in further crime-fighting activities, not as a police official, but as a volunteer. I formed a charity called Forensics for Justice, which I financed myself. And Forensics for Justice focused on dealing with corruption within the criminal justice system. And we're not talking here about a traffic cop asking for a bribe to avoid charging you for speeding. We're talking about serious corruption at general level within the police and at high level within the prosecution service. And those activities have been going on for another 15 years after the Jackie Celebi matter was finalized. And while all that was going on, commissioners, it should be pointed out that I'm actually an engineer by profession, and I've been running my own property business both here and overseas, which has been my main form of income, property development and property speculation. But the reality is I've been able to sustain my activities and sustain the activities of Forensics for Justice. And I think, unless you've got any questions, I'd like to leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. O'Sullivan.
Sorry, just Mr. O'Sullivan, your involvement in the SAPS, I see at page 4 of that bundle, there's a letter from the SAPS which speaks to your position that you hold, and this is an SAPS letter. It says you currently, as a date of that letter, at least, which is 97 June 26, that you hold the position of lecturer. You see where I'm reading?
That's correct, Commissioner.
Is this what you employed? Were you ever operational at any point?
In fact, at the time that I was a lecturer at the Police Training Centre, I was also carrying out policing at the airport in the Border Police. So there was a reservist unit at the airport which I helped form, which comprised of about 35 volunteer members, and I selected people that spoke different languages so that we could have some impact on the crimes that were taking place at the airport. But during the period in question here, I was the head lecturer at the Police Training Centre, and in fact, one of the other pages, you will see that one of my students, in fact, on the next page, page 5, one of my students was the now President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa. So it gives you an idea of the sort of activity we were involved in.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan.
Thanks, Commissioner Baloyi. And before we leave your CV at page 1, just to clarify, you indicate that having previously worked as an engineer, you are also, or was a police officer for many years. Was that in South Africa or in the UK or both?
No, it was overseas. So I was in the United Nations Police for a spell. I was working for the British government. I was seconded to the United Nations Police, and that ultimately I ended up being seconded for a period to the BSAP, which was the police in what was then called Rhodesia, it's now called Zimbabwe.
But you were never a police officer in the SAP or SAPS?
Correct.
Thank you, Commissioner Baloyi. And before we leave your CV at page 1, just to clarify, you indicate that having previously worked as an engineer, you are also, or was a police officer for many years. Was that in South Africa or in the UK or both?
No, it was overseas. So I was in the United Nations Police for a spell. I was working for the British government. I was seconded to the United Nations Police, and that ultimately I ended up being seconded for a period to the BSAP, which was the police in what was then called Rhodesia, it's now called Zimbabwe.
But you were never a police officer in the SAP or SAPS?
Correct.
Thank you. We then invite us to turn to the content of your statement. At page 1, you have listed under 8 topics the areas you would like to testify to.
Yeah.
You start, on my understanding, with paragraph 1.1, which are general comments to the nature of the testimony you'll be giving.
Yeah.
I invite you then to speak to the contents of paragraph 1.1 or to read them into the record if it suits you better.
Thank you, Commissioners. What I've done to speed this process up is I've gone through my statement and highlighted what I consider to be the relevant, vital components. So 1.1, I've used the headline, penetration of the criminal justice system by organised crime is not new. And then I've said, despite General Mkhwanazi's dramatic press conference, where he purported to blow the whistle on infiltration of the criminal justice system by organised crime, criminals have been able to successfully penetrate the criminal justice system long before 6th of July 2025. There are many instances of such, and I will deal with some very well-known matters below. And then I've said, the point needs to be clear. This is not a new phenomenon. It's been going on for very many years. Not only is it not new, but it will also be my evidence that General Mkhwanazi has known about the links between organised crime and the police for many years. It's not something he suddenly became aware of last year. I will also testify that one of the cornerstones of General Mkhwanazi's complaint, interference by the Minister of Police, is something that happened way back in 2011, at which time General Mkhwanazi elected to unlawfully comply with said ministerial interference. And I'll come back to that later, Commissioners.
Thank you. Just 2 questions for me before we move to the next topic. You suggest that, as you call it, the penetration of criminal justice system by organized crime is not new. Would it be a fair comment to say, at least on this score, you agree with General Mkhwanazi? That his testimony was that over a period of time, the criminal justice system appears to have been infiltrated by organized crime.
Yes.
And he testified to the extent he went to try and shine light on the problem. So, because you say it's not a new phenomenon, just on that aspect, I just want to find out if technically then you agree with General Mkhwanazi in that regard.
My area of divergence is that it's not new. Of course, General Mkhwanazi brought it up on 6th of July last year, but it's nothing new. In fact, I've given an example of the 1990s, when the head of organized crime in KZN, Superintendent Piet Meyer, was sent to prison for 10 years for colluding with drug traffickers. So it's not new. It's been going on for a long, long time.
What's the point of diverging? What are you seeking to establish, or what are you seeking to convey to us by diverging on this?
Commissioner, if one looks at, and later we will come to it because I've had the media conference of General Mkhwanazi transcribed. If one looks at the transcript, it looks like, wow, this is something that's going on, it's just happening. But actually it's been going on for donkey's years. And to have it suddenly thrust into the public eye on the 6th of July last year, I will be later explaining that, in my opinion, that actually there's another motive for what happened last year, and we'll come to that later, Commissioner.
Thank you, Chair. And in fact, the point about Senior Superintendent Piet Meyer you make at your page 3, at the top of page 3, that first paragraph, what you just alluded to.
Yes, I mentioned, sorry, ma'am, I didn't catch
No,
it.
I was saying the point about the arrest of Senior Superintendent Piet Meyer
Yes.
you make at the top of your
I've
page
covered that
3.
as an example, so I've gone way back.
Yes.
In the 90s. And then I come forward with a couple of examples in the last 20 years, serious examples, which are common cause.
And my second question is in relation to the statement you make about General Mkhwanazi, and you say at the bottom of your page 1, General Mkhwanazi has known about the links between organized crime and SAPS for many years. My reading of your statement, unless I missed it, does not seem to cover the knowledge that you attribute to General Mkhwanazi in this regard. Do you deal with this aspect in your statement? His knowledge of links between organized crime and SAPS?
Yes, I think what we'll come to later is not only his knowledge, but the steps he took, in my opinion, unlawful steps, to deal with one of the senior police officials that was involved in the penetration of organized crime into the criminal justice system. But I think I'll come back to that later.
All right. Thank you for that. That then would bring us to your paragraph 1.2. Having then said something about Senior Superintendent Piet Meyer and the events of 1990 to make the point that the problem is historical, you then at page 3, 1.2, deal with Mr. Glenn Agliotti and Commissioner Jackie Celebi. As you are aware, I think that is that relationship and its outcome has been ventilated for a long time and quite in depth in the public domain. So with that in mind, would you like to deal with your contents of paragraph 1.2,
Yes.
perhaps by way of summary?
Thank you. Commissioners, I'm not going to read the whole of 1.2 out because it's just, it's common cause. But I've underlined a couple of important portions. 1.2.3, I've said Mr. Agliotti made his immoral living out of importing and exporting narcotics and counterfeit cigarettes. He often moved drugs and/or counterfeit cigarettes with a police escort arranged by a certain Captain Paul Stammet. Captain Stammet was not even a real police officer. He had been appointed by Commissioner Celebi at Mr. Agliotti's request. He was not even on the police's payroll system and had never undergone any police training or fitting out of uniform. But the sad part about it is he had a police identity badge that was issued by Commissioner Celebi. And then I've said Mr. Agliotti's other accomplices, and this is common cause, it's in the judgment which we'll refer to, included security company owner Mr. Clinton Nassif. Mr. Nassif also bribed Commissioner Celebi so that he could expedite the issue of firearm licenses for a security company. Mr. Nassif later supplied the same firearm that was used to murder Mr. Brett Kebbel in September 2005. Commissioner Celebi interfered in the investigation by allowing Mr. Kebbel's Mercedes, in which he was murdered, to be removed from Norwood Police Station by a brother-in-law of one of the murderers to a car body workshop where it was cleaned of all forensic trace evidence. And then I've attached, I refer on page 5 of my statement, I've referred to documents which are attached, which make sober reading. Annexure B1 is the first draft confession made by Mr. Agliotti to the Scorpions in his attempt to obtain indemnity in return for implicating Commissioner Celebi. Annexure B2 was the judgment of the High Court on sentencing Commissioner Celebi. And Annexure B3 is the judgment of the Supreme Court of Appeal dismissing the appeal of Commissioner Celebi against his sentence. And I think it's common cause, Commissioners, that the level of penetration was such, and it's made clear in Annexure B, which is referenced on page 4 at 1.2.7, it's made clear that the value of the drugs that were seized were 200 million rand. And those were seized by the, what was then called the Scorpions, or the DSO, the Directorate for Special Operations. And that was based on information which I supplied to them at the time when I had infiltrated that drug cartel for the purpose of having those drugs seized. And it's documented on the Annexure B. Thank you, Commissioner.
And so if one has regard to your paragraph 1.2.3 and 1.2.4, where you make the conclusions that Mr. Celebi, or Commissioner Celebi, maintained relations with persons such as Mr. Agliotti and Captain Paul Stemmet, who made an immoral living out of importing and exporting narcotics and counterfeit cigarettes, that's on the one, and Mr. Celebi, Commissioner Celebi rather, being bribed by one Mr. Clinton Nassif. Those facts you do not know, you don't have personal knowledge of, you derive from the documents that you listed.
In fact, I do have personal knowledge, but I've used the documents to prove that personal knowledge. In fact, the morning after Brett Kebble was murdered, which I still, very distinct in my head, he was murdered on the 15th of September, 2005. And on the morning of the 16th of September, 2005, I met with a source at the McDonald's at Bruma who gave me the information about the gun that was used to kill Mr. Kebble. So all that information is not hearsay, but it happens to be contained in the court judgments. So it actually confirms my personal knowledge.
But for purposes of your testimony to the Commission today, you rely on these documents specifically?
That is correct.
Thank you. Is there any other comment you'd like to make regarding the relationship between Commissioner Celebi and Mr. Agliotti before we turn to your paragraph 1.3, where you deal with another relationship?
Now, I'm really happy for the commissioners to, in their own time, to read the evidence and draw their own conclusions, because I believe it's quite compelling.
Yes. Then if we stay with your paragraph 5, your page 5 rather, at paragraph 1.3, you have a subtopic, Radovan Krecher, General Mabasa, and Colonel Steyn. Now, at page 6, you give quite an extensive background to this particular topic. It's at page 7, you then deal directly with the relationship between Mr. Krecher and General Mabasa on the one hand, and further on at page 9, you deal with Mr. Krecher and Colonel Steyn. So let's take it.
Let me just place on record that I was involved in a totally different capacity on issues relating to Mr. Agliotti, the matter of Mr. Brett Kebble, issues that related to Mr. Stemmet and even Mr. Nassif, but the context related to the decision that had been taken by Mr. Vusi Pikoli to prosecute General Celebi. And then Mr. Mshe, or Advocate Mshe, came in to replace Mr. Pikoli, but he was an acting NDPP. And this is how I then got involved. Advocate Mshe wanted to know whether or not he should reverse the decision of Advocate Piccoli. A 4-person panel was appointed to look at that decision by Mr. Piccoli and to pronounce on whether the 4 people were of the view that Mr. Piccoli was correct in taking the decision. I chaired that 4-person panel, and our decision was that Mr. Piccoli's decision was correct. I thought I should just place it on record that I had that involvement on some of the issues or some of the facts that you are touching on.
Thank you, Chair. Understood.
Thank you.
In fact, thank you, Commissioner, for that. I was fully aware of all that, so I'm grateful that you still have that memory at the time. And in some ways, it's rather unfortunate or coincidental that we are sitting here today in the college named after the then Justice Minister, who took, in my opinion, an unlawful step together with the then President in suspending Vusi Piccoli, because I understood that that suspension, in fact, was aimed at preventing the arrest and charging of Commissioner Celebi. However, that's my opinion. But obviously, I was very happy when in January of 2008, that 4-man committee issued the...
It was a 4-person, we actually had a woman.
There you go. I used the word man as in human. So I was very happy with the outcome of it, because I had actually left the country because there was a threat against my life for raising all those issues. So I had temporarily exited myself from the country for my own safety. So that was how tight things were in those days. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. O'Sullivan. But as I understand, your testimony today doesn't relate to that part of things that the Chair highlights. You're just placing it on record. You are dealing with the criminal charges and trials that subsequently took place.
And I think if you want to get the crux of what I'm saying, it is that the Agliotti Syndicate, which was a drug cartel and counterfeit cigarette cartel, they had well and truly infiltrated the criminal justice system and were utilizing, at the highest level in the criminal justice system, their contacts to enable them to continue with their criminal activities undetected.
Thank you.